Well, Bitcoin's been making headlines again this week, hasn't it?
Mhm.
Seems like every time you turn around, there's another article about attacks on Bitcoin ownership, especially here in the US.
Yeah, it's tough to keep up with sometimes.
It can be a lot to process, even for folks who follow this stuff closely.
Absolutely. And it's easy to get caught up in those headlines without really grasping what's actually going on beneath the surface.
Exactly, which is why we're here. So let's dive right in, shall we? For starters, Bitcoin just had its halving event. Now, for those who aren't as familiar, this is something that happens roughly every 4 years, where the rate at which new Bitcoins are created gets cut it. You guessed it in half. Sounds kind of scary, right? Like something that would rock the boat, no?
You'd think so.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing. The Bitcoin network,
Hmm.
well, it's built for this. It's almost like it anticipated these events from the get-go.
So it has like built-in mechanisms to handle these changes and maintain some stability.
Exactly.
Fascinating.
Go.
Okay, so the halving happened, no major implosion, everyone takes a deep breath. What happened next?
And then we see this totally unexpected surge in transaction fees.
Really?
Oh, yeah. But get this, it wasn't because of a sudden spike in people, buying things with Bitcoin.
Oh, interesting. So what was driving it then?
NFTs primarily.
Wait, NFTs on Bitcoin? I thought Ethereum was the main platform for NFTs.
Right. But it just goes to show you the enduring appeal of Bitcoin. Don't forget, Bitcoin is OG, the original blockchain. And its core features that security, that decentralization. Those are proving incredibly attractive, even in the world of NFTs.
So even with all the regulatory back and forth, Bitcoin's underlying value proposition, it's still drawing a crowd.
Absolutely. It's a magnet for innovation and investment. Speaking of which,
Oh, you mean grayscale slashing fees?
exactly.
Big news. And on top of that, we have a spot Bitcoin ETF launching soon in Hong Kong.
Yep.
What's the significance of all of this in the grand scheme of things?
Well, they're both huge steps toward mainstream Bitcoin adoption. Lower fees mean it's more attainable for everyday investors.
Mhm.
And a spot ETF in Hong Kong. That could be a game changer. We could see institutional money pouring into Bitcoin.
Now, for those who might not be as familiar, can you explain what a spot ETF is and how it's different from other ways to invest in Bitcoin?
Of course, a spot Bitcoin ETS would let investors tap into the price movements of Bitcoin without actually owning the underlying asset.
So you don't actually own the Bitcoin itself.
Right, it's more about tracking the price.
Right.
And the beauty is, it would trade on traditional stock exchanges, making it super easy for individuals and big institutions to invest in Bitcoin through familiar channels.
Streamlining the process. So more accessibility, potentially more investment. It seems pretty positive, but there's always a but, isn't there? We're also seeing pushback, especially from governments, like they're a little bit threatened by Bitcoin's growing influence, maybe. We saw the Philippines ban Binance outright. And here in the US, there's chatter about potential legal action against its founder, CZ. What's going on here? Are governments really that afraid of Bitcoin?
Well, there's definitely a pattern here of regulatory crackdowns in the crypto world. And Bitcoin being the biggest, most decentralized, well, tends to be in the spotlight. This resistance, it comes from a few different places. But to really get it, we need to zoom out, look at the bigger picture, global macroeconomics, geopolitics.
Huh.
The world's changing and fast. And these Bitcoin headlines, they're just one symptom of a much bigger power shift that's happening right now.
All right, well, let's connect those dots then. What are some of these larger forces at play that are feeding into this tension surrounding Bitcoin?
Well, one of the biggest things is the US dollar. Its dominance is being challenged in a way we haven't really seen before.
Yeah, you see countries like Russia and China moving away from the dollar for trade more and more these days.
Exactly. They're turning to alternatives, their own national currencies, and yeah, even cryptocurrencies.
Right, and we can't forget about BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. They're actively trying to build a new global financial order, one where they have a lot more say, more control. It makes you wonder, is this really about the US feeling the pressure? Are they worried about losing their grip on the global financial system, that top spot they've enjoyed for so long?
I think it's definitely a factor. And as other countries look for alternatives, the U.S. seems to be reverting to those familiar tactics we see: increased sanctions, asset seizures.
Even going after individuals, like what's happening with Binance and CZ.
Exactly.
So it's not just about targeting so-called bad actors then. There's this growing concern that this push for control, it's extending to everyday people too.
Absolutely. A prime example of this is the push for a central bank digital currency, a CBDC. The proponents, they'll tell you it's all about modernization and efficiency, streamlining things.
Making things easier.
Right. But critics, They see it as a way to potentially increase financial surveillance, you know, keep tabs on what everyone's doing, control the flow of money even more.
It's a bit like that saying, if you're not doing anything wrong, you have nothing to hide. But it feels like the definition of wrong when it comes to money, that's always changing, especially these days.
It's true. And that brings us right back to Bitcoin ownership. It's not just about whether you personally invest in Bitcoin or not. It's about who gets to call the shots, who decides how you use and manage your own money. If the U.S. government can dictate how, or even if, you're allowed to hold your own Bitcoin, where does it stop? Could they apply that same logic to other assets, other freedoms?
So, to put it bluntly, is the US government trying to ban Bitcoin?
Well, it's tricky. A complete ban, it's pretty unlikely. Probably impossible to actually enforce, given how decentralized Bitcoin is. But what we are seeing is a very deliberate effort to control those on-ramps and off-ramps, make it harder, riskier for everyday Americans to truly own and use it independently.
You mentioned Operation Choke Point 2.0 earlier, which honestly sounds a little ominous. Can you tell us a bit more about what that is?
So a few years back, there was this program, Operation Choke Point, and it was controversial. The government basically pressured banks to cut ties with businesses they deemed risky, even if those businesses were operating completely above board. What we're seeing now, it's similar tactics, but this time they're targeting the crypto industry.
So, trying to cut off exchanges from the traditional banking system, but then at the same time, they're approving Bitcoin ETFs, which are basically Bitcoin investments managed by Wall Street. It feels a little like a bait and switch, lure people into these convenient government-approved ways to access Bitcoin, but without true ownership or control.
You've hit the nail on the head. And it gets even more concerning when you consider the recent actions against self-custody wallets. The FBI issuing warnings, the crackdown on privacy-focused wallets like Samurai Wallet. It's all connected.
They want to keep everyone in those tightly regulated boxes where they can track and control everything. For those who aren't as familiar, can you quickly explain what a self-custody wallet is?
Sure. Imagine, instead of keeping your money in a bank, you have this special box, right? And this box, it has a unique key, and you're the only one who has it. That box, that's your self-custody wallet, that key, your private key. It gives you complete control over your assets.
So with a self-custody wallet, you're basically your own bank.
Exactly. You can send, receive, and store your Bitcoin without relying on any third party. And that seems to be what's causing some concern in certain circles.
Yeah, this whole situation with Samurai Wallet is definitely unsettling. They're going after the developers of a privacy-enhancing technology, not even the users themselves. If that's not an attack on the tools that enable financial freedom and privacy, I don't know what is.
It sets a dangerous precedent, for sure. Their argument is that these tools could be used by criminals. But you could say that about almost anything. Cash can be used by criminals. The internet can be used by criminals. It's a slippery slope. You start eroding the right to privacy, you erode freedom itself.
So here we are with these shifting global power dynamics, increased scrutiny on cryptocurrencies from governments, and this debate about security versus privacy. It's a lot to unpack. What does this all mean for the average person listening? How do they navigate this increasingly complex landscape? It can make your head spin a little, can it? One minute you're checking Bitcoin's price, and the next you're down this rabbit hole of global power struggles and financial systems and what it all means for the future.
I know, right? It's a wild ride. But that's what makes it so interesting. It's about way more than just money or technology. It's about the kind of world we're creating.
Exactly. So for our listeners who might be feeling a little overwhelmed, what are the key takeaways here? How can they navigate this and make sure they're making choices that align with their own values?
Well, the most important thing is to remember that knowledge is power, right? The more you know about Bitcoin itself, the different ways to actually hold it, the forces at play in the financial world, well, the more equipped you'll be to make the right decisions for you.
So it's not enough to just buy some Bitcoin on an exchange and just forget about it.
Not really, no. You got to understand the difference between holding your Bitcoin on an exchange, which is kind of like having an IOU, versus true self-custody. That's when you control the keys, which means you have complete control over your assets.
So like we were talking about before, it's the difference between keeping your money in a bank and keeping it in that special box only you have the key to.
Exactly. There are pros and cons to each approach. Of course, convenience versus security, for example. But the main thing is to be aware of those trade-offs and then decide what works best for you, your needs, your risk tolerance.
Simon Dixon actually mentioned he's working on an animation series to explain this all in more detail. I think that would be really helpful, especially for people who learn best visually.
Definitely. He's great at breaking down these complex ideas and making them easy to grasp. I'd recommend checking that out.
Consider that your official hall pass to go full-on Bitcoin nerd, listeners.
The more you learn, the more you know, the better equipped you are. And don't just take our word for it. Do your own digging. Question everything, stay informed. This whole thing, this fight for the future of finance, for individual freedom, for control over your own assets, it's far from over. We've got court cases, lobbying, global trends shifting all the time.
It's like we're living in a financial thriller, and the stakes are pretty high.
They really are. Which brings me to my final thought for today. If governments are this threatened by a decentralized technology like Bitcoin, something that just lets people transact freely and securely without needing a middleman, what does that tell us? What does it tell us about the future of money, about power, about the lengths they'll go to control these things, to limit access? And what does that say about the system they're trying so hard to protect? Something to think about.
Wow. Definitely some food for thought. Listeners, that's all the time we have for today. But like we always say, keep learning, keep asking questions, and stay vigilant. The future of finance is being shaped right now, and what you do matters. Until next time, stay curious.